Hello, and welcome to another edition of Between the T's, the knowledge sharing program from Texas Bank and Trust. I'm your host, Karen Partee. Today, we're going to have a unique discussion about the importance of proper estate planning by examining the life and death of the rich and famous. So what can we learn from their mistakes? Well, joining us today to take a deep dive into that conversation are Texas Bank and Trust Senior Vice President and Trust Business Development Officer, Ms. Amy Proctor, and Senior Vice President and Chief Investment Officer, Ms. Kimberly Spinks. Welcome to the program today, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, this is fascinating subject matter because when we think about celebrities, we think that they live a life of luxury free from financial stress and worry. But you're here today to tell us that that may not be the case and that you may not be too wealthy to properly plan your estate.
That's right, Karen. It happens far too often. We see it play out in the media. And unfortunately, what we see with the celebrities is what is actually happening with just normal people. It's estimated that 60 to 67% of the adult Americans don't have wills. And so that kind of brings us to one of the things that we want to talk about is, let's start with Prince as an example. He was an American singer, songwriter, and record player. We all know him. He was an actor, a dancer, and a great philanthropist. He'll always be remembered for his flamboyant stage presence,
Absolutely.
his extravagant dress, his creativity, his musical genius, and the fact that he could sing this huge range, tonal range of 5 octaves. But that Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, an award-winning singer, Prince, died of a drug overdose in April of 2016. And his estate totaled in the hundreds of millions of dollars. You'd think that someone that had that kind of assets would have had a team of attorneys and a very well-planned estate,
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes, and I know that reports say that he didn't even have a will in place despite his sizable estate.
That's right. And without a will, Prince had no say-so whatsoever into whom or how his assets will be distributed. That was determined by a probate court in the state of Minnesota, who recently ruled that his entire estate, again in the hundreds of millions of dollars, will be distributed to his sister and 5 half-siblings.
Well, let me ask you this. I know there's a lot of tax burden that comes with estates. Would a proper estate plan have lessened the tax burden?
It could have. That proper estate plan would have had to start many years ago for him to have really saved estate taxes. But it also could have happened in his estate at the end with a will if he had made charitable contributions, because those would have been deductible against the estate. And speaking of estate taxes, his beneficiaries are not even going to get half of his estate.
Wow.
Because the federal government is going to collect their 40% in estate taxes, and then the state of Minnesota is going to collect another 16% in inheritance taxes from his heirs.
So one of the immediate takeaways from this is we do need to have a will in place as part of a more comprehensive estate
Right.
plan. But how often should we be updating that will?
Well, we can't say exactly how often you need to update your will. We can say that every few years you need to review your will and your other estate planning documents, and particularly if you have a major life change. And Whitney Houston's a prime example of that. Whitney had a will,
Okay.
but it was very outdated. Unfortunately, Whitney died of a drug overdose, of drowning in a bathtub with
Right.
complications from drugs, in the Beverly Hilton in 2012. She was only 48 years old.
Very young. Very young.
Her will was outdated. It had been put in place about 20 years before that, just before the birth of her only child, Bobbi Kristina Brown.
Okay.
Bobbi Kristina was only 18 years old when Whitney died. And Whitney's will said that she wanted to give the entire estate to Bobbi Kristina, but it was to be paid in installments at
Okay.
3 different times, when she was 21, 25, and 30. All very young ages to inherit huge sum of dollars,
Absolutely.
Millions
Absolutely.
of dollars. Well, Bobbi got the first one at age 21. It was about 10%, roughly $2 million. And then, unfortunately, in 2015, she died again of a drowning in a bathtub with drug intoxication listed as a factor. So she never received the rest of the estate. Whitney's will said that if she died without having children and without being married before the age of 30. Then her will transferred everything to her mom, which is gospel singer Sissy Houston, and her 2 brothers.
So Whitney's example is, she had the will in place, she had provisions for the beneficiary, the sole beneficiary to receive the money, but it just speaks to we need to have regular updates of our will. So what are some questions when we're thinking about putting a will in place? What are some questions when we're thinking about doing the updates to that?
Okay. Well, some of those would be like, who's going to be handling my trust or my estate, and are they still around? Another question might be, who are my beneficiaries, and do I need to update those? Are they still the beneficiaries that I would like to give my assets to? And another would be, are there provisions in there that make sure that they're held in trust until the beneficiaries are better able to handle those assets?
Okay.
And it's very important that you look at those when you have a major change. So those would be things like a marriage or a divorce, the birth of a child or the death of a spouse, or even greatly accumulated, a greatly growing assets.
Okay. Well, very good information, Amy. But Kimberly, I want to turn to you now and take a deeper look into the trust issue with this. Some celebrities have thought enough to have a will, but there are situations where a will may not actually be enough.
That's correct, Karen. There are trusts that could be utilized to do any number of things. In fact, the uses of trusts are as varied as the people who utilize them in the first place. Some of the things that they can be used to accomplish are to avoid probate, to care for a special needs child, to pass assets to spendthrift heirs, and then to pass on to charity, any number of uses. So a prime example of a case where a trust would have been very useful is with a lady by the name of Norma Jean Mortensen. Maybe you know her as Norma Jean Baker, but we all know her as Marilyn Monroe. The young actress was known for movies like All About Eve, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and There's No Business Like Show Business. She tragically died at the age of 36 from a drug overdose. And while she had a will, she did not have a plan for who would receive her $30 million estate in the event that her heirs passed away. So Marilyn's will spelled out the following distributions. She had a small amount going to her mentally ill mother to care for her. Her personal items were to go to Inez Melton, her personal assistant. And then the remainder, which was certainly the bulk of her estate, 25% of that was to go to her psychiatrist to help people who could not afford psychiatric care.
Okay.
And 75% of the remainder was to go to Lee Strasberg, her acting coach and mentor. So Strasberg received 3/4 of Marilyn's estate as an outright gift. Therefore, at his own death, his estate went to his second wife, Anna, who also, in that, got Marilyn Monroe's estate.
Okay.
So it's interesting to see how Anna handled Marilyn's bequeathed assets. First, she hired a company to license Marilyn's likeness and products. She won a lawsuit against the heirs of Inez Melton for her personal belongings and subsequently auctioned those off through Christie's.
Okay.
And eventually, Anna Strasberg sold her own interest in Marilyn's estate for between $20 and $30 million. So the irony here is that a woman who had met Marilyn one time earned more off of Marilyn Monroe than Marilyn earned herself.
That is an incredible story, but
It is.
Raises some very good points about being prepared. And one of the questions I must ask is, how would a trust have benefited Marilyn's estate in this type of situation?
Right. She could have specified, for example, she could have set up a trust for the benefit of Lee Strasberg rather than giving it to him outright.
Okay.
Establish a trust where he earned the income off of it or income plus some of the principal throughout his life, then in turn at his death passed on to charities or other things that Marilyn would have wanted beyond Lee's death.
Okay.
She could have also set up a trust to benefit her mother and care for her, provide the income to care for her mother in the institution that she was in. We also encourage clients to consider naming a corporate trustee like Texas Bank and Trust rather than an individual. The benefits of a corporate trustee include specialized expertise, regulatory oversight, and continuity. A trust company by design is going to have continuity.
Okay.
If a trust administrator retires, passes away, there are plenty of other very qualified people to carry on.
Well, this is such a, it's an eye-opener that, failing to have a simple plan in place can cause such unexpected endings that we've had with all three of these particular celebrities. So Amy, you can tell us about why it is, as Kimberly brought up the idea of working with a specific trust area, why that is such a great benefit for us as we're working on our estate plans.
Well, absolutely. Whether it's a will or a trust, with the will you need to name an executor that is able to handle that estate. And it's a difficult job managing an estate after someone's death. It can be lengthy and costly to not have that because you have to go through the courts. It can cause contention among family members. And you really are just putting your whole estate in the hands of a court to make the decisions on what to do if you don't have that in place. If you don't have the trust, as Kimberly said, you could be leaving it to someone who mismanages your assets or handles it, on their benefit, or they don't make the right decisions on how to ultimately dispose of them for something that would be what you care about.
Absolutely.
And so that can be a huge mistake. But our trust officers at Texas Bank and Trust and the Trust Division are trained to take up that challenge and to help people preserve and manage their wealth and eventually distribute it the way they would like to.
So if we have additional questions about establishing a will or establishing a trust, to whom specifically should we contact?
Any of the trust officers can help. I mean, we're glad to meet with anybody to talk about their estate concerns.
Okay.
We often meet with clients and prospects with their estate planning attorneys to help make sure that they get proper provisions in place, that their assets will be distributed the way that they want. We do have officers in all of our major markets at Texas Bank and Trust, so Longview, Tyler, Frisco, which covers the Dallas Metroplex. And possibly one of the easiest ways to reach us is via the Texas Bank and Trust website, which is, as you know, www.texasbankandtrust.com. There's a Trust and Investments tab at the top that you can just click on, and there's basic information for people to read. And then there's also a place right there where they can find a trust officer in their area that can help them.
Excellent. Well, this is overwhelming but really important information for us, and it's great opportunities. As I said, it was a unique conversation to have about learning from others' mistakes, individuals that we thought might have had the resources to have a proper estate plan in place. So we appreciate both of you joining us today and sharing your knowledge. But unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today for this edition of Between the T's. Once again, I'd like to thank our special guest from our Trust and Investment Division, Ms. Amy Proctor, our Senior Vice President and Trust Business Development Officer, and Ms. Kimberly Spinks, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Investment Officer. Thank you so much again for joining us today, and please join us next time for another edition of Between the T's as we help you take control of your financial world, either for today or tomorrow. But remember always, knowledge is power when it's shared between the T's. Thank you. I'm Karen Partee, and thanks for watching.